On March 11th last spring, federal ICE agents surrounded a house on Dorset Street in South Burlington, Vermont. Protesters showed up and tried to prevent ICE from getting inside the house. No one died, but some protesters and one state trooper were injured. Our colleagues at Vermont Public have spent months trying to piece together what happened that day, using hours of body camera footage. They've released a new documentary called No Exit. We talk with one of the reporters who was on the scene that day on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake, dedicated to strengthening visitors' connections to the natural world. More at wildcenter.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, August 10th. Vermont Public reporter Liam Elder Connors was there when this ICE apprehension exploded into a dangerous, tense public standoff. He spoke with Catherine Wheeler.
It was kind of unlike anything that I have seen and covered here in Vermont. There were activists and protesters surrounding this house to prevent ICE from going in. ICE has a pretty small team here in Vermont, and so they called in reinforcements from out of state to come in and help them get inside the house. I should note they were waiting for a judicial warrant to go into the house. They couldn't just bust down the door without that warrant. And while all of this is going on, South Burlington City police officers are there trying to keep the peace between the protesters and ICE and trying to make sure this situation doesn't get out of hand. And eventually, Vermont State Police and Burlington Police also are called onto the scene to help address what's going on.
So you and other VPR reporters are covering this throughout the day as it's unfolding, and it really escalates.
It does. What ends up happening is that ICE is unwilling to back down from the operation. They're determined to go into the house because they say that the person that they're seeking had, crashed into them, assaulted federal law enforcement officers. So they're determined to get in the house and make this arrest. And they're going to do that no matter what. And that's what we've learned from body camera footage that was released. And state and local police in Vermont were very concerned that if ICE carried out that operation, that the protesters on the scene could be seriously hurt or, even deadly force could have been used. And remember, this is just a few months after ICE protests in Minneapolis had been all over the national news. We'd seen 2 people shot and killed in Minneapolis by ICE agents. So that was clearly on the mind of Vermont law enforcement. And so what ended up happening was this plan developed where Vermont State Police were actually going to clear a pathway for ICE to get into the house and pull protesters off of the door so ICE could go in and execute the warrant they eventually got.
So, as you mentioned, this was captured on body cam footage from police at the scene, and VPR reported on that event when police released that footage. But you also chose to dig deeper into that, and I was wondering if you could talk about that decision to really dive into the footage and then where you went from there.
This event that happened on March 11th, this ICE raid and the protests, it was a huge event in Vermont. It was the first major confrontation between ICE and protesters that we'd seen. And also, Vermont police, both local and state troopers, were right in the middle of all of this too. And there were a lot of questions about whether or not state and local police acted appropriately, whether they violated Vermont policies that bar their collaboration with ICE, whether they used excessive force against protesters. And so we had this unprecedented opportunity to get inside the decision-making process of police on scene through the release of body camera footage. I've been a reporter covering criminal justice issues for most of my career, and I've never seen such a trove of footage released from an incident before and not have it be heavily redacted. And so we wanted to try to understand more of the decision-making process that happened over the course of that day. And really the only way to do that was to go through more than 130 hours of body camera footage from the 3 agencies that were on scene. And so we gathered a team to do that and to try to catalog it and figure out what happened to eventually put together the documentary we made.
So what did you learn going through that footage?
One of the takeaways was that there was tension between local police and ICE on scene from the beginning. South Burlington police even tried to, call higher-ups in Department of Homeland Security to get ICE to back down. There's even one moment where the deputy South Burlington police chief on scene is trying to ask ICE, is it worth it to just go in there and do this operation right now? And an ICE agent even accuses this deputy chief of being on the side of the protesters.
Yeah, and I think you would feel the same way if they hit one of your guys.
I'm just asking a question.
But, I'm
just asking a question.
It's very frustrating.
No, I'm not on their side. I'm just trying to make sure that this doesn't escalate. That's all.
And you guys make sure it doesn't escalate too, right?
Another one was that Vermont police saw that once they got involved with moving protesters aside, that it was not going to go well for them, that both, there'd be a lot of public criticism of their actions, but also I think there was a sense that this was their only option and the best option for them try to make sure, nothing escalated too much on scene. So those were two of the big takeaways I had. And then also just sort of seeing how, after the raid of the house, there was no real plan to get off scene. And that's when we saw some of the most physical confrontations between Vermont police and protesters at that point. And so just sort of seeing the way in which the day escalated and sort of spun out of control was a really, I think, important thing to see unfold through the footage.
How do you think that the raid itself and the aftermath have affected the Burlington community and the state?
It's raised a lot of questions about, the limits of actions that the state of Vermont has taken to try to bar Vermont law enforcement from helping ICE in their operations. We have a policy that prevents officers and Vermont police from aiding in civil immigration enforcement, and that doesn't carry over into criminal actions, like criminal immigration enforcement. And so what we saw in South Burlington was when ICE got a criminal judicial warrant, that policy no longer applied, and Vermont State Police and local police, they weren't barred from aiding ICE anymore. And so that's raised questions about, how effective is that law? And, just generally to what extent state and local police should have a role in these operations and how they should act and behave, and questions about whether or not they acted appropriately. I should say all of the Vermont agencies reviewed their officers' actions and cleared them of any wrongdoing. So that's just, I think, worth noting.
Is there anything next on continuing to cover immigration in the state of Vermont that you're paying attention to?
We're keeping an eye out, obviously, for incidents like this that could unfold. I mean, I think for me personally, I went out to cover March 11th, and when I went out with a colleague of mine, and, we weren't really sure if it was going to be anything. And when we got on scene, we realized it was something. And so, like anything, sometimes things can just sort of escalate, and you don't really know. So we're trying to keep an eye on if we hear about immigration enforcement actions taking place, just running it down to see if there's more about it and how it could unfold.
That was Vermont Public senior reporter Liam Elder Connors talking about Vermont Public's new documentary, No Exit. No Exit is currently available on Vermont Public's YouTube channel. You can find a link at ncpr.org. Music today by Michael Farley of Canton. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.